Well, good morning from where we are. Once again, welcome to the Walk with Them podcast. This is our second episode of this season or series. And it's such a joy this morning to be joined by Bob Goody, who's the CEO of Rural Missions. I'd say me and Bob have some interesting experiences, but together, which is hopefully beyond the scope of this podcast. But yes, no, it's a joy to have you on, Bob. Bob is the CEO, as I said, of Rural Missions, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what they exist to do and what their mandate is, as it were. But yes, it's going to be a very interesting podcast as we investigate the importance of considering context as we journey with young people and seek to share the gospel with them. It's very imperative that we understand where we are and how best to reach the people that we're trying to reach. So we're delighted to have Bob on to be able to share and give us some insight. But before we move any further and get into the meat of the podcast, I'm going to hand over to my wonderful co-host, Paris.
Yeah, hello everyone. Before we jump into the main conversation, I thought it'd be good to have a little warm-up question, just so that we can get to know each other a bit better and just, ease into the conversation. So I wanted to ask if you could have the opportunity to have a 1-hour phone call with somebody from the Bible, who would you choose, except Jesus, obviously? But yeah, who would you choose and why?
Oh, wow. That is a typical good youth worker question and one that I always hate. You've actually flipped it a little bit. What does an hour conversation on the phone look like? I think probably for me, the one that I'd love to talk to the most, because I've probably read him the most, is John.
Okay.
I just love that he brings out about Jesus being the Christ, the Messiah, fills it with the miracles. And actually, I'd just love to sit down and just have that candid conversation of, is there a reason that you told us that you ran faster than the other disciples? You want to point to Jesus, but you want to know that you're the fastest and you were the one that Jesus loved the most. So I think it would be a really good first-hand account. What did it mean to follow him despite everything that was happening around him? How can we follow that closely as well would be a beautiful thing to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Good one. Okay, Nessie, you're next. Who do you choose?
I think I would go with Joseph in the Bible. I have a lot of questions for him. I want to find out, how was it being in the prison for that long? Did you think God had given up on you? What was the dialogue like? You knew you'd done the right thing. What was that? What did that look like? And when you met your brothers in Egypt, was there something? I know you kind of did that. What was that whole kind of story about when you were kind of playing them and kind of coming up with all these scenarios? And also, what did it feel like to not give in to the temptation to really rub it in that you had really succeeded and they kind of depended on you now? So that would be me. What about you, Paris?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's definitely an insight into family dynamics. For me, it would be Moses, but particularly I would want to ask him about kind of his interactions with Pharaoh. What was it kind of like having to keep going back to say, let my people go, and then watching, God do all these different things. So I think that would be really interesting to find out and just to see what it was like from his perspective. Yeah. I think that was a really good question, personally. Thank you
Brilliant.
for your answers, guys.
It was very good.
Thank
it
you.
was a very, very good one.
Okay.
Yeah.
But Nessie's going to give us a backdrop of our actual conversation now with Bob, and just take it away.
Yeah, so in terms of trying to just understand the significance and the importance of being intentional about our surroundings and knowing that it matters how we approach our context in trying to deliver and share the gospel. I'm just going to read something from 1 Corinthians 9, 19 to 23. That helps us to understand the Apostle Paul, of course, was one of the greatest evangelists, apostles, teachers of the gospel, really helped to kind of pioneer the gospel, just to help us with the framework. So this is 1 Corinthians 9, 19 to 23. Even though I am a free man with no master, I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with those who followed the Jewish law, I too lived under that law. Even though I'm not subject to the law, I did this so I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. When I'm with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from the law so I can bring them to Christ. But I do not ignore the law of God, I obey the law of Christ. When I am with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news and share in its blessings. And it just helps us to understand that there is a framework, a paradigm, an approach that we can endorse.
Yeah.
Yes, in trying to make sure that we are relevant, but also considerate to the cultures and the context that we operate in. So that provides some context and helps us to lead into this question that I want to ask Bob. Bob, can you let us know a little bit about what rural missions is? Why does it exist?
Yeah, so Rural Missions, we are an ecumenical Christian charity covering the UK, and we exist purely because I think the rural churches are under-resourced, they're under-supported, yet they actually make up a considerable size of the church in this country. And so we want to be able to help churches of 10 people, 20 people, 30 people in villages that just need someone to come and love, support, and encourage them. So we do have a real singular purpose that we want to help rural churches to think and be more missional. So what does it mean that not just the leaders, not just the evangelists and the apostles and the people operating in those gifts, but what does it mean for everybody of every age to really get to grips with, I believe in Jesus, I love him, and he's called me to share him with my neighbors, with my community. Because it's not just all about the big programs and that kind of setting. It's going, if I'm having a coffee and cake with a neighbor, how can my faith be a natural part of that conversation? And my background is in youth and children's ministry. I've spent the last 25 years before this role with that singular focus of how do we engage young people, how do we engage children and families. And so I do bring that into the organization as we look to help and support, because it's important. In villages, there are 1, 2, 3 young people, but they still need Jesus. They still need to find and follow him for themselves. So actually, let's not just put all our eggs in the urban basket. No offense to urban saints, for sure. But actually, our churches need support, whether they're urban or rural. And we just have a particular heart to serve those that we feel are under-supported and underutilized.
Yeah. So with that then, could you tell us kind of what are the main differences between discipling and getting people to know, come to faith and know Jesus? What's the difference between the work that you do in the rural setting versus perhaps what we do in urban settings? And as you've mentioned, you know, there's maybe a lot less young people there.
Yeah.
What would you say are the challenges that those young people face? Because we often hear about the challenges for, you know, inner city kids, but we don't actually hear a lot of what the challenges are for those that live in rural settings. Could you share a bit more about that so we can kind of understand?
Yeah, so for some context, before this role with Rural Missions and leading them, I was the missions director for Youth for Christ. So I do understand that difference and that understanding. But the key really is that urban and rural mission are not opposites, but they do operate very differently. The cultural, social, relational dynamics are different. And I think some of that is because within the urban context, it is often shaped by our density and our diversity. There are large populations, that frequent turnover, multiple cultures, faith expressions, faster pace of change, Tesco being open 24/7, Amazon being able to get you a delivery the same day. Like we know and feel that. But in the rural context, they don't have that connectedness in the same way. They aren't that fast paced. The level of diversity, both culturally, ethnically, is completely different within a rural setting. or outlying market towns where they've become commuter villages and commuter towns, they are starting to see that, but the majority still is a white British culture within that environment where the net curtains are up. We know what Betty's doing 3 doors down, and if you want to get to somewhere, you're going to have to get the bus, but there's only 2 buses a day. So rural mission, by complete contrast, is shaped by the proximity of the people around them, but it's the longevity. The communities are much smaller, but the relationships are so interwoven. Family history matters. People are not just known for who they are, but because of who their family have been for generations in that village. And actually, the church tends to be the last remaining community space or symbolic space or pastoral space for people to engage with. It's often the post office is already shut. There's no pub anymore. There might be a little grocer's that's still running, but that's not where young people can go and congregate. There's not those spaces and places where they can feel safe and secure in the same way as there might already be at the end of their road in an urban context. So I think it's slower and more relational.
Right.
It's highly visible. Young people, you might be the only young person in your village. So mistakes, successes, all of those kind of things, they are noticed. You are noticed more deeply. It's deeply contextual because one village is very different to the village up the road because of who they're surrounded by. But I think they might be less resourced as a church to be able to support, but they are highly trusted. I know of villagers that will still go and knock on the vicar's door because they know where the vicar lives and they know that is a person of trust and safety. So rural mission cannot be expressed by numerical growth alone. I know in an urban context, it was sometimes, how big's your youth group? Oh, we've got 40. And it's like, if a youth group in a rural has 4 or 5, they're probably doing well because that's probably the entire village of young people. So it's hard to quantify. There are differences, but ultimately all of them need Jesus.
Yeah.
Like Jesus remains the same there's not an urban Jesus and a rural Jesus. There is just him. And so if we are all about how do we build relationship with young people, I think rural can really help us to learn and experience more of what it means to be relational than I think our urban churches potentially could.
I think that's really interesting, especially kind of the point where like those places, they're very much connected by history, by people's history, and kind of, I guess, a legacy that's left before them. And so I think also the church plays kind of an integral part of kind of that rooting of history, and the fact that, you know, like you said, they can just go and knock on the vicar's door because they have that familiarity and trust. And I think the difference kind of in an urban space is that people are always moving, people are going to different cities, you know, they graduate, they move on, they relocate their families, so they don't stay as connected to their community. They kind of thrive in a new one. But this one, it seems quite, yeah, the longevity is there, which is quite different. So yeah, how you interact with that, yeah, it's interesting. What do you think, Nessie?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate like what the kind of nuances that you're highlighting and teasing out, Bob, because I think it helps us to understand that, you know, oftentimes people will say youth culture in the UK is like this, youth culture in the UK is like this. I myself, you know, do a lot of research on youth culture and the contemporary trends. But when we think of that, sometimes our lens is predominantly focused on the urban settings and the urban landscape, which, you know, perhaps there are biases that are perhaps perpetuated by various just approaches that we've endorsed as a youth work community. But I think I really want to be able to foreground the importance and the salience of rural missions as an organization and how imperative it is for us to be in touch with the whole landscape of the UK. So I appreciate what you're saying. I was reading very briefly something that the government released on the 29th of October 2025, and they were highlighting that actually in terms of rural contexts, multi-agency work is more difficult just because of geography, so
Yeah.
coming together and doing stuff together, because even if you're in a Christian setting, the opportunity to work with others, even secular organizations who have the same mind and the same heart to help young people, is so much easier. You've got government, local government, you've got all these other organizations that exist to pioneer youth work, and the proximity helps, geographically. And I wonder if for you guys, on top of the other kind of constraints and just differences in rural contexts, that's something that you've had to grapple with, trying to coordinate multi-agency efforts to try and reach young people. Is that something that happens?
Uh, it is to an extent. I think it's an interesting one because in rural, there aren't really any agencies. There might be
Yeah,
the
yeah.
YFC, the Young Farmers Club, but Youth
Yeah,
for
yeah.
Christ aren't in a lot of villages. Um, I think there is a bit of a different way of looking at it in that when I was in urban ministry, and I still help lead an urban church as a side note. I think some urban churches can get to a large amount of people in their church and they feel that they're self-sufficient. And so sometimes it's difficult to then bring in other agencies because it's like, oh, we can do youth work and we've got the volunteers. Your mid-sized urban churches are more open to how do we connect together? How do we bring the council in? How do we bring healthcare and chaplaincy and all those?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes in rural, because there might only be two churches in that village or even one church, some of it is not how do they do the interagency, but we try and help them to understand how could we do this as inter-church.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, if we're a church of 12 and they're a church of 20 up the road, and we both want to see young people engaged, how do we simply do this together as churches is probably more the bigger story rather than bringing in other agencies. But as I said, part of the remnant of working in rural is that they have history.
Yeah.
So I know of one church that we've worked with, there was 15 people in it, but they were pretty much all of the same family and same lineage. And their grandmother and their great grandmother and everyone was outside in the graveyard. And so to say, how do you do this with the church up the road? They're like, no, this is my church. Because they do see it as a quite insular moment, almost a silo of, I've always been here, this has always been the place, and so why would I consider sending people to a different church because this is my church? So I don't think they have the same struggles of the agency. I think they have more the struggle of interdenominational and interchurch more so.
Right. So there's like it's a lot of ownership. It's that sense of ownership and not kind
Yeah.
of wanting to let go of that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's community. This is where I've been brought up, this is where I live, and this is where I'll die before I go to be with the Lord.
Do you, could I ask as well, do you think the
Yeah.
young people then, do you think they also adopt that mentality, or have you kind of experienced that actually they think differently and that they have kind of expressed that actually we will move away from this place? Or do they kind of have the same mindset, do you think?
Yeah, I mostly they are trying to change. They are trying to shift the move. I think some of that has not been since COVID. I think
Right.
COVID was a real deal breaker for rural communities in that they suddenly became more interconnected than they've ever been in their life. And so I know a lot of people that never had internet, never mind broadband before COVID. And all of a sudden they were like, we all need this because I can't actually talk to my family anymore. So actually the rise of internet, I think there is still a bit of a lack there. And so some young people culturally can't engage online because they can't get a broadband signal, they can't get a decent enough 5G signal or even 4G where they are.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's an issue, because I think culturally young people are coming off and trying to digital detox, and that's a whole other conversation. But young people do want to get out. They want to branch out more. I think it's difficult because it's expensive. Rural villages aren't flush with money, despite what some people might think. It's not the idyllic space. There's hardship and deprivation to the highest levels across our rural communities. And so they'd like to get out, but they just can't, because there's no way they're going to be able to afford to move away from the family home. So they'll end up taking on the farming business or taking over the bakery or whatever it is that they can do in their community. There's not the public transport to get into the town to get a Saturday job as much as there would be for someone within an urban context. So all in all, they want to shift, they're willing to shift, but I don't think it's as easy as we think it might be for them.
Right. So, there's a lot more barriers than we think about.
Yeah. The more they get out, the more they realise there is a world beyond the hedge, beyond the field. So the first time I met you, Nesu, was working at Amplify, the Young Evangelists Academy. Like, brilliant. As soon as I became chief exec for Rural Missions, we partnered in that, because I knew that there was one or two young people in lots of churches in rural communities, but they had no idea how to inspire them, equip them to share their faith with their friends, because you've got an 80-year-old and a 90-year-old doing all that they can to support them. But we were like, well, if you can send them on this evangelist training academy, they're going to be with 150 other young people. They're going to be equipped. They're going to see the hope beyond the hedge, and all of a sudden things start to make sense for them. And for me, that's been liberating to release that into rural churches and go, if you can just send your one, let's inspire them, equip them, and you never know what transformation could happen in your village, for sure.
That is, I think it's illuminating. For a lot of people, there's all kinds of assumptions that we have about rural communities, in terms of, some people imagine, and I'm speaking of myself, sometimes I think, it could be very, very broad, because I'm envisioning, some of it's the countryside, so you've got all these, very wealthy areas where there's, a lot of, agricultural enterprises that are, funneling a lot of money into the community. So they might be very vibrant in one area and not so much in another. So there's all kinds of ideas. But to hear you talk about some of the limitations and the challenges is really illuminating for myself. And I know you've talked about this briefly. Extensively enough, but I thought maybe we could investigate it a little bit more, because now that you're talking about the limitations in terms of digital connectivity, you're talking about some of the even just the things that perhaps we take for granted. For example, in urban contexts, I've been talking to a lot of young people in my youth group, and right at the beginning of the year, they're talking about the tours that they're gonna, or can I say the shows that they're going to go and watch, musical shows and all that kind of stuff. That's a given. Like, at the beginning, they're thinking, hey, I'm going to pay £150 to go and watch this person. I've got 2 tickets for £500. Someone said to me, I think 2 days ago, I said, oh, wow, that's quite an investment. But that's, but that's normal to young people, going out to shows, going out to some of these places, cinemas, going out to restaurants and all that kind of stuff. And my question is, especially for a youth worker who perhaps is navigating a transition from an urban to a rural context, what do you have to think about? Because serving young people in the context is different. The pastimes perhaps are different. Do you have any, kind of advice on that?
I think because there is that much stronger community feel, like, the limitation is that they wouldn't be able to get back. Like, if you went to go watch a show in London, you can catch the night bus and you'll be back home, no issues. If you're in Nottingham, even if you're in Mansfield where I am, you can get back home because you could book an Uber and your parents will pay for it on the credit card that's linked to your Uber. But you just cannot do that if you're out in the middle of nowhere, because in order for you to get back, someone is going to have to come and pick you up. So whether that's your mum or your dad, or it's your friend's mum and dad. And so there is that stronger cohesion of cross-family joining together And it's not just the friendship groups of the young people, but it's the friendships of the parents because, oh yeah, you're going out with such and such, and oh yeah, Brenda's going to pick you up, isn't she? That's good. His like, so there is transferability, but you're right in that they're not about to turn around and spend 500 quid to go watch Taylor Swift or someone.
Yeah.
Because for the most part, the money isn't there. It's not as doable, and it's not just can I get the ticket. It's how do I get there and back. So, as a youth worker moving in, your trips to the local bowling alley or laser quest or anything like that, how are you going to mentor young people according to good safeguarding measures? So I was a youth worker in St Albans, and most of my budget went on taking young people, meeting them in Costa one-on-one and doing discipleship and mentoring in that space. You don't have a Costa that's open 24 hours in the village. So where are you going to start to meet your young people? How do you mentor them? Well, you're likely going to do it in the church. So therefore, you're going to need to have booked an extra couple of people to be around to make sure you've got good safeguarding in place. The parents are probably need to going to sign a higher level of agreement that you're going to meet them one-to-one. So there are peculiarities and organisational things that you need to be aware of. Don't just expect you can come in and you'll suddenly be running a 40-strong youth weekend or anything like that, because the reality is it's not there. It's not the same.
Yeah, I wanted to ask quickly then, taking that into consideration, could you give us an example of something that you think has worked really well then? Yeah, whether it's advice, like what's worked for you that you've experienced?
So because in rural communities the church is probably the only community space that's available, actually some of the greatest times is when the church have just gone, okay, what's it going to cost us? Some biscuits and some weak squash if we just open our doors after school. So even if we've only got half a dozen young people in our village, when they come back, they could come do their homework in our church. They could come meet their friends and we'll give them the space. We're going to have 2 volunteers that can serve these things and be around to chat and talk to them, because you're unlikely to be able to pay a youth worker. You're unlikely to get someone in a paid role. So therefore, you're going to have your volunteers probably in their 60s and 70s. But for me, the best youth workers I know are in their 60s and 70s because they love young people. They want to invest. They've got time to invest. So when I was down in Wiltshire leading a charity there, the local church had a mentoring scheme where they put every young person in contact with an older person, and they saw a real shift in the church because on a Sunday morning when they came to church, the young people didn't just congregate in one separate space. They came in and like Johnny went and chatted with Derek, who's been mentoring him, and like Sarah went and talked to Brenda, and this real intergenerational soon opened up. And I think that's always going to be the key for good youth work, because they want to see it modeled through generations, and not just youth work is not just for half a dozen young adults that have got some capacity and want to invest. Youth work is about every age group going, we're serious about this. Young people are the future. They are the now of this church and this generation. So actually, let's spend some time and really do this together. They are part of our church. They're not a separate entity to our church.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox in a moment.
No, that was good.
I was getting on it there.
No, we appreciate that. We appreciate the insights. And in fact, one of the things that you said that I think is helpful, because I think the discourses in different contexts, the discourses around what's relevant and what's pressing in terms of youth work needs is very different. So for example, one of the things that has come up over the years, at least that I've been in youth work as few as they've been, is this idea that oftentimes some quarters feel like there's an underinvestment in youth workers. So people are talking about, in terms of even financial remuneration, what does that look like for youth workers? What are the pay scales like to incentivize people to take it as a proper career and not just think, oh, you're just playing games for like 2 hours. So I mean, you know what I mean? So so, but you're now saying that in fact the likelihood that you're being paid in rural settings is significantly lower, if I'm hearing you correctly, that there isn't that expectation that it's a given that you have employed a youth worker in a rural setting. Is that correct, or am I wrong?
Yeah, and I don't want to speak out of turn too much, but we merged another charity into us back in June last year, 2025, called the Resources Cupboard, and they're our children, youth, and families specialists. So I've got Becky and Rebecca that work in that. Now, they serve a community in Sharnbrook, so in Bedfordshire. There's a group of 30 churches in a deanery, and for the last couple of years, they've been helping them do their children, youth, and families ministry. Now, if I was to tell you that there are no paid youth workers there's no paid children's workers, it is literally Becky and Rebecca trying to rally 30 different churches in about a day and a half's worth of time.
Wow.
But if you go half an hour down the road to Luton, to Bedford, to any of those kind of places, you can't walk too far without hitting into a youth worker that's been paid for by a diocese, by a denomination, by a charity. And so there is a real shift, even a few minutes down the road, from what you could expect to have. So as Rural Missions, we support the rural church for free. We don't charge for anything we do. And that's because we're passionate about supporting those that are under-resourced. Now, if they turn around and give us some money, we will happily take it, because we need to continue as a charity. But there isn't the money flowing around, so therefore the salary's not there. You just have to look. You've got a vicar over 8 different churches. That's quite common across village churches. You tend not to even get a full-timer in one specific church unless you're starting to head towards a market town or bigger, purely because of finance, population, and needless to say, it's where the sexy stories come from. We had 40 young people come out of nowhere to an event, and we baptized 5 of them. It's like, that's incredible. That's front page news. I know of a church that has grown from 12 people in its church to 33 in the last year.
Wow.
Nobody's sung about that story. Nobody shared that story, because 33 in an entire church is a low number, and it's not the sexy story. And I think notably we just need to get on and serve young people and not look for the big fame and the stories and the money, because it could happen in your urban, but it's not going to happen in the rural, from my perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, before we jump into the last question, Paris, do you have any further thoughts on that? That you're just thinking?
I just think everything overall has kind of shifted even my own perspective, and how I think about I guess the issue is I don't think about those rural spaces enough, and I guess that's just either lack of information or lack of exposure. So it's been really insightful to kind of hear about some of the barriers in particular that you just don't think about. And when we're thinking about youth work, you're right, it's not just about the inner city kids. It's all youth. They're not split by where they live. So that's something to be mindful of.
But how beautiful could that be? Our hope is that every young person comes to know Jesus. And so in an urban context, if you've got 40 in your youth group, you're probably drawing from a good couple of thousand young people locally. But the reality is, if a church in a rural community really hits it hard and they've got 10 people in their youth group, that could be 100% of their village young people.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that is a staggering place to think that the impact and the difference they're making, whilst it seems small, is really significant, because that's all the young people. I love that. It's a beautiful thing to reflect on.
Yeah, it is very, very Yeah, as I said, insightful and helpful. I'm much like you, Paris, in the same boat. Just having my paradigm shifted and my mind expanded to try and accommodate a broader framework for looking into youth work. So, Bob, this has been so helpful, and we thank God. Yeah, before yeah, I mean, I guess our last kind of question is really, do you have any advice? So, say someone was a youth worker in an urban context, was used to the urban paradigm and the way we do things, even the metrics that we use sometimes for measuring the impact of youth work in urban context, and was navigating a change and a shift to a different rural context. What would you tell them? What do you need to know?
I think there's a few things, and I think even if you're staying in urban, I think they remain the same as well, because context changes around us, whether we like it or not. The culture shifts, things change. So I think probably the key thing is, don't assume that what's worked before will work again in the exact same way. Like, even running a course one year and then running in the same place the next year, things shift, things change, and it might be different. So don't just presume what happens down the road will happen for you, because we are all different. Context, even 3 streets away, can be very different. What's the school catchment that's going to be there? But I think, irrespective, there's a few principles in that. I think make sure you listen first before leading. I think that's the right thing to do wherever you are. Learn the stories, the rhythms, the unspoken rules of the community. Like, nothing happens on a Wednesday night, and that's for a specific reason. So don't put your youth work on the Wednesday night, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Resist speeding ahead. Trust can't be rushed. You probably won't get your quick wins. It's going to be about the longevity. If you think coming in to be a youth worker for 2 years and you'll see drastic change, I think we need to shift our perspective a little bit, because young people are looking for consistency. They're looking for longevity. They're looking for people to be with them and for them. And then, I guess, valuing people, presence over what your program looks like. I think a lot of young people, even within the urban context, aren't looking for fancy programs anymore. They're looking for a space to be themselves, to feel honoured, valued, loved, cared for. And I think we do that well in churches, or we should, whether we're rural or urban. So I guess the reality is, calling is transferable, but context is not transferable. We've got to have wisdom wherever we go, whatever path we walk, and just seek God in that new place. Like, what is he calling us to? What is he already doing? Where is he already at work? Like, I know a youth worker that went to a new village, not to be paid, like he'd got a job, but he felt called to move to a village. And he realised there was a football club that operated in the village. So rather than set up a new youth group, he decided to honour the context, honour what was there. So he got involved in the football club. And actually he helps to support and lead that now. They pray as a football club and all these kind of things. And it's just beautiful to spot that's what God was already doing. And so that's where I decided to put my energy. Like, God's called me to this place. He's not called me to take over this place.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So yeah, be humble, have hope. God will do it. We just need to be faithful in the midst of it all.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing those points with us. I think it's been a really educational episode. And if you want to find out more about this topic and just kind of get educated yourself, then you can visit ruralmissions.org.uk and the brilliant work that Bob and the team are doing. And I think it's really important that we actually make it a priority to pray about this. Pray for
Mm,
rural missions.
mm.
Yeah, don't get so caught up in the city, but pray for others out there as well. But thank you for joining us in this episode. If you'd like to follow us on Urban Saints social media, you can keep up with all our latest developments. Visit our website to be nosy and see the new brand. And yeah, let's just continue to pray for each other as we try to walk with young people. So thank you, Bob, for your time, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Bye.